The Lord is my light and my salvation.
Why are you telling me this before I think?
Of whom am I afraid? The Lord is my... Oh man, seeing you got me recorded. I'm all nervous. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Of whom am I afraid? The Lord is my life refuge. Whom do I fear? When evildoers come to devour my flesh, these, my enemies and foes, stumble and fall. When an enemy encamp around me, even then I do not fear. When war be raged against me, even then do I trust.
That's a good one.
Thank you, Mitch. So, page 58 starts out with what? What's the first sentence?
Really have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path?
Who's the we?
We?
Rarely have we seen a person.
That's what I said. Who is the we?
Who's the we?
The people of Alcoholics Anonymous?
In the beginning of the forward to the first edition, it says, "We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body." They're the authors of this book. They're the ones telling the story.
Right.
They're saying, rarely have we seen a person fail who's thoroughly followed our path. Singular, one path.
Right.
Even though there's more than 100, they don't say paths. You heard it said you can work this program any way you want?
No.
People think it's my program. I'll work the program the way that I want to work the program.
Yeah, skipping this thing.
Okay?
I don't see that working for me.
Some people give that impression.
Oh, I know. I hear it all the time, and it's just like...
Okay, so the question I pose to you is, up until you got clean this last time, what kind of path were you on?
Any fucking stupid idea I could come up with that didn't never work. I mean, it might work for a little bit, but never stuck. I mean, nothing ever stuck.
So
Trying to find any way to make drugs work in my life and be able to be successful at the same time.
trying to control your using.
Yeah, either that or...
Get your life on track and keep it that way and keep on using.
Right, exactly. That's what I thought was possible, but it's not. I mean, even when I did have my life on track and everything was rolling smooth, I mean, it's because I had Amy as a crutch, and she was like helping me the whole time. Anytime something went bad, like, I mean, I had money coming in, but it's like, and then after we split, I fucking didn't care anymore, and fucking without that, I guess that kind of keeping me on that steady path. Without her, fucking everything just went. I just spiraled on the ground, didn't stop till everything was gone, and like did it without even thinking.
So on page 44 is the first page in the chapter We Agnostics. It says, in the preceding chapters, we hope you have learned something about alcoholism. We hope we have made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. Okay? We've talked about this before, that people think that they're an addict because of the type of drugs they used, the quantity of drugs that they used, how many different types of drugs that they used, how many years they've been using, how many times they've been in rehab, how many times they've been in jail. It's either consequences or some other bullshit, right? When the fact of the matter is they've made clear that the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic is the alcoholic or the drug addict has lost the power of choice, right? Sooner or later, one way or another, the main problem which centers in my mind is going to drive me to picking the first one up. And once I pick the first one up, it's all over but the crying and the fucking arrests. I cannot control my using or my drinking, right? It's the lack of choice. It's the insanity. It is the lack of control which defines it, okay? Then they pose one single compound question. They say, when you honestly want to, if you find that you cannot quit entirely, stop and stay stopped. Okay,
yeah.
Which means you have this mental condition that eventually drives you back to picking the first one up. Or if once you start drinking, you find you have a little control over the amount you use, which indicates the physical condition. That the physical condition, I can never get enough. I'll drink a bottle of fucking Jack Daniels, and until that bottle's gone or I'm laying on the fucking floor, I want more. I cannot get enough. Bang a quarter ounce of heroin in a fucking night. And it's just like, what do we need to do to go get some fucking more?
Exactly.
Right?
Well, that's what I would always
Can't get
do.
enough.
I'd always have a lot of shit, and the more I had, the more I'd use, and like I'd always know, well, I need to sell some of this, and then that's be like, fuck it, I could always fucking go steal something and fucking make up the difference. And
so if you can answer yes to either part of that question, most of us can answer yes to both of them. Okay,
yeah.
Then you are probably alcoholic or addict.
Probably answer yes to both.
So, if that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness with which only a spiritual experience will conquer, right? Because now we're going to get out of the problem, which is a symptom. My addiction is only a symptom of the problem. What I suffer from is a spiritual malady. That's why only a spiritual experience is going to conquer it.
Right, because you got to
forget about the fucking addiction and the alcoholism. It's just a fucking symptom, bro. Let
yeah,
go of it.
It doesn't say,
gotta take care of
it
it.
doesn't say anywhere in the book now that you're clean from drugs and alcohol. Yeah.
Okay, so what is the next paragraph?
Where are we at?
2-1.
Huh? To one who feels he is an atheist or agnostic, such an experience seems impossible. I thought that as well. But to continue as he means disaster, especially if he is an alcoholic, if of the hopeless variety. To be doomed to an alcoholic death or live as on a spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to face.
Okay, so the path that I've been on is to be doomed to an alcoholic death. That's exactly what the doctor talks about in the doctor's opinion. He says most alcoholics are doomed. There ain't a fucking thing we can do for you. Most of you are going to die a short, miserable fucking death of dying of chronic alcoholism, right? So the path that I have been on is I'm a raging alcoholic. I'm a fucking hopeless dope fiend. I'm a convicted dangerous criminal. These are indicators of the kind of path that I'm on. I can't hold a living. I'm full of fear all the fucking time. I'm always trying to manipulate situations. When I'm sober, I'm very uncomfortable inside my own skin, and I start making messes, and I build all this hate between me and other people, and then I feel loneliness, and pretty soon I get so fucking miserable, I have to get high. And even if I realize what the consequences are, I gotta fucking do it anyway because I am fucking miserable, right? This is a brief general description of the path that I'm on. Right? Now, if I want to turn that around 180 degrees and I want to be happy, joyous, and free, right? That's what it's going to take. I'm going to have to turn that has to be turned all the fucking way around going in the opposite direction. I need a revolutionary change. And that is a word that you're going to find several times in this book. Revolutionary change. Revolutionary change in our whole attitude and outlook upon life.
I didn't think
right?
that was possible.
So, revolutionary. Think about that for a minute. What does that mean? This country, the United States, began with a Revolutionary War.
Right.
The British were in control in this country,
Yep.
and the colonists said, we're sick of your shit, and they rose up and they drove the British out. So essentially what that meant was a new power rose up and drove the old power out. That's what happened in this country. Right? And that's what I need. I need to have a revolutionary change, whereas a new power becomes available and drives the old power out. The power of fucking drugs and alcohol has over me. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, because drugs are like basically your
So-
God or your religion before. Cause, I mean,
So
you
what
did
is that
everything
going to
for 'em.
require?
A complete change of everything?
That's going to require divine act of mercy.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? Grace and mercy. Grace is both of them are gifts that I don't deserve. There's nothing that I can do to invoke God's grace. We talked about being at the jumping off point, right? Going to meetings hoping maybe something is going to change. Don't know what, don't know how, can't see it. I'm hopeless, but you're in a waiting pattern, waiting for the grace of God to come and rescue me, right? I can't invoke that. There's no conditions to grace, or it would cease to be grace, and I wouldn't be able to meet the conditions, whatever they were anyway, because I'm fucking hopeless. I don't have the ability. Grace is a gift that I don't deserve.
That's the way you're thinking, yeah.
Right? And there's no conditions to grace. Mercy, on the other hand, is a gift I don't deserve, but mercy has conditions attached to it. And whereas grace is a gift I don't deserve, mercy is not getting what I do deserve. Right? And I didn't do anything to deserve. I didn't do anything to bring myself into the condition of being an alcoholic or an addict. And that's a hard concept for a lot of people to get their mind around. But if you look back in your own history and you've become convinced like I have that I was probably born into this condition, and by the time that I really realized that, wow, my drinking and my fucking getting high is a problem to me, it was already too late.
Yeah,
right?
I look
That was
back-
not a conscious decision that I made.
Even before the drugs and alcohol, I was doing dumbass shit all the time, like as a young kid. I kind of started thinking about that the other day.
So given that condition, whether I'm responsible for it or not, whether I caused it or not, is a hopeless condition, right? There's nothing I can do to get out of that condition. And I need to turn that around. I need a divine act of mercy. Okay, mercy has conditions attached to it. In chapter 7, it talks about when you meet a new man, if he wants to make a decision and tell his story. Right, let's go to that page. I think that's on. Might have to find it by the highlighting in my book. 96. In the middle of the page, it says, suppose now you are making your second visit to a man. He has read this volume and says he is prepared to go through with the 12 steps of the program of recovery. Having had the experience yourself, you can give him much practical advice. Let him know you are available if he wishes to make a decision and tell his story, but do not insist upon it if he prefers to consult someone else. Okay? This is the essence of chapter 5, how it works. You boil it all down. It's step 3 and it's step 4. You may not tell it to another human being yet, according to the instructions in the book, but you're still putting it in writing. You are making a decision, right? Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him, and you were telling your story. We make a fearless and searching, fearless moral inventory of ourselves. That is the whole essence of chapter 5, how it works. Make a decision and tell your story. Right? These are the conditions necessary in order to put myself in a position to receive divine mercy. How it works is how the process of receiving mercy works. Right. But I can't meet those requirements. I'm required to make a decision and then launch out on a course of vigorous action, starting with personal house cleaning, step 4, and leading into step 5. I need to already have access to divine power in order to meet those conditions. Oh, yeah. So you have a promise of divine mercy, a revolutionary change, and 2 conditions that I have to meet, but I have to have access to power before I can meet them. Hence, I need to be in God's grace first.
You need to have the willingness and the honesty.
Before I can meet the conditions of mercy. That all makes sense to you?
Yeah.
Okay. So, grace... There's nothing that I can do to invoke God's grace. It happens in His own time. Given that I have the seed of faith planted and I've gained enough truth to make that faith grow, step 1, the spiritual principle behind it is truth. Or some people say it's honesty, and I agree with that. But they fall short after that. Step 2, they talk about faith, and some people talk about that too. But nobody gets this fact that chapter 5, steps 3 and 4, chapter 5 is all about how divine mercy works. Somewhere between the step 1 and 2 process and the step 3 and 4 process, God decides when we're ready, and He puts us in the sphere of His grace. That is a gift, right? So understanding this is the 12th month and the 12th step, which the whole process ends with, these are the principles we practice in all our affairs, right? We're talking about truth, faith, grace, and mercy. To understand that these are the principles that we're talking about. Okay, because on page 59 where the steps are, it says these are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program of recovery. And it's in past tense, took. But you'll notice at step 10, it changes the angle, the view of the steps from a past tense into a current and going forward tense, right? So continue to take personal inventory, sought through prayer meditation, and these are the principles we practice in all our affairs is in present tense. It's from here going forward. So the principles become more important than the steps themselves. The steps are the tools, but the principles these are 2 different things.
Right. The tools are kind of what you use to get to be able to use the principles.
Right. The simple kit of spiritual tools are the steps, but the principles that we practice are a completely different affair. So far we have truth, faith, grace, and mercy. That's what we're talking about here. That all makes sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
100.
So I like working around this illustration of the man on the bed. Okay. This is an illustration that is a companion to this book. And this illustrates Bill Wilson with 7 months of sobriety, Dr. Bob with 16 days of sobriety, and their first viable prospect laying on the bed, Bill Dotson. This is an illustration of that. And there's a story that goes along with that.
Bill W. and Dr. Bob were
the co-founder.
The co-founders.
Yeah, I know.
Okay. So if we jump to page 156... That's where the story of Bill Dotson starts at, the man on the bed. But life, in the middle of the page, it says, but life was not easy for the two friends. They're talking about Bill and Bob. Plenty of difficulties presented themselves. Both saw that they must keep spiritually spiritually fit. Really? Well, how did they do that? Well, let me tell you. One day, they called up the head nurse of a local hospital. Didn't say they read a book. Didn't say they went to a fucking meeting. Didn't say they called their fucking sponsor. They called the hospital. Then they explained their need and inquired if she had a first-class alcoholic prospect. She replied, yes, we've got a corker. He's just beaten up a couple of nurses. Goes off his head completely when he's drinking. But he's a grand chap when he's sober. Though he's been in here 8 times in the last 6 months, okay? 8 times in 6 months, he ends up in detox. Have you known people that have ended up in detox 8 times in 6 months? I've watched one dude 10 times in 1 month. And I took him to 3 or 4 of them.
God damn.
Yeah. Dead man walking. Right? Dead man walking. Okay. Understand he was once a well-known lawyer in town, but just now we've got him strapped down tight. Here was a prospect, all right, but by the description, none too promising. The use of spiritual principles in such cases was not so well understood as it is now. Okay, so this happened in June of 1935, and they were writing this book at the end of 1938, right around in that area. So they're talking about 4 years-ish later, making the point-blank declaration that the use of spiritual principles in such cases was not well understood as it is now. So he's giving an indication to the reader that he is going to use some everyday language in order to be able to convey to us how to use spiritual principles. Oh, okay. So, but one of the friends said, put him in a private room. We'll be down. 2 days later, a future fellow of Alcoholics Anonymous stared glassily at the strangers beside his bed. Who are you fellows? And why this private room? I was always in a ward before. Okay. Now, Bill Dobson did not have a pot to piss in or window to throw it out of, obviously. We're talking about the height of the Great Depression, and this guy is drinking himself silly on whatever he can, and he's been in detox 8 times in the last 6 months. He's always been in a ward, right? Like a dormitory for drunks detoxing, shaking, and puking all over the fucking place. And now he finds himself in a private room. He doesn't deserve to be put in a private room. He can't afford to be put in a private room. And he sure doesn't have the means by which to repay somebody for being put in a private room. It's a fucking act of grace. It's a gift he don't deserve, right?
Right.
Okay, this is their illustration they're using here. So,
I got that opportunity with Adam to a degree, you know, when you were in detox or at Casa de Vida. You know, you had called and asked about cigarettes. You were like, hey, can I get a pack of cigarettes? And I was like, you know what? Like, I'm going to get you a pouch. I'm going to get you some tubes. And we had actually, him and I had gone over recently what he's going over now and the difference between mercy and grace. And it was probably a month or 2 prior, but it was still stuck in my head. And making sure that I didn't put any strings or anything attached, right? Because that's a part of like this right here, is like they put him in this private room and they're not going to have him, he doesn't have to pay any of it, right? So I was like, I'm going to get these things for him and I'm going to lay a spiritual tool at your feet. I was like, hey, do you want some books? Do you read? I made sure you were able to read. Okay, yeah, you read. So you want the Star Wars book? Cool, bring you the Star Wars book. And then also in that pack, I laid a big book in there. I did not tell you to read it. I did not tell you do anything with it. Because it was just, I'm going to put this at your feet. I don't want you to feel obligated because that grace has to, it's not going to be grace if I put strings on it. You know? So it was an opportunity I saw to do something along those lines.
I wasn't mad about the book. I was like, all right. I was already thinking about it. Like, I just still didn't understand how the fuck it was going to work. But
So his response was, why this private room? I was always in a ward before, right? It got his attention and it made him curious, right? That's the effects that grace produces. It's important for me to recognize that, because I go out and I be gracious to people on a regular basis. And sometimes they don't appreciate my graciousness. And if I'm living in self-will, I will either become more gracious or more demanding, depending upon the situation. You'll read about that in step 3. Become more gracious and more demanding, right? That indicates I'm living in self-will. But if I perceive that I've gotten their attention and I've made them curious, that they may be ready for more, that they're in a position where God has put them in His grace. So I have to watch for the effects that grace will produce. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So in Bill's story, when Ebby shows up, he noticed that he was somehow different. He showed up at the door and he looked fresh-skinned and glowing. But Bill still figured, well, we'll have something to eat. And because he was drunk, and he's going to sit down and he'll offer him a drink and he'll drink with them. And when it came time for him to want to drink with him, he pushed a drink across the table to him and he turned it down. 60 days sober. He was sitting there talking to a drunk dude. The drunk dude is offering him liquor, right? He wasn't running and hiding, trying to protect himself from that shit. He was out being an instrument of grace. And so he turned it down, and he did that by the power that we get access to from grace, right? And that got Bill's attention. He says he was disappointed but curious, right? It gets people's attention and makes them curious. He says, come now, what's this all about? And that's exactly how it affected me, and I didn't know any of this. In the morning of August 17th of 1993, I was sitting in a room. I had just gone out for the night, and the facility was kicking me out. I was waiting for my PO to show up, and it dawned on me she's not going to show up alone. She's coming with the cops, and they're going to haul me back to jail. My next thought is, well, I should just get up and walk away while I still can. Go out on the town and party it up until I get picked up and finally put in jail. That is what my normal MO always was, but I didn't do that. I just sat there contemplating. And then it got my attention and made me curious. Why would I not just walk away from here and go back out on the rest of my run before I get put in jail? It got my attention and made me curious, and it caused me to look within myself and come to realize right after that this merciless obsession that had been plaguing me for months and months on end, driving me to the brink of fucking insanity, was just fucking gone. It just didn't exist. I could tell something was inexplicably different within myself. So that is my personal experience, the first I'm consciously aware of getting a good dose of grace and what its effect had on me.
I know that feeling.
So we have Bill Dodson's experience of it. We have Bill Wilson's experience of it. You now have my personal experience of it. And we just had your experience of it with you. Okay?
My personal experience of it myself would be when I got to the prison yard. You know, I had this moment of clarity of like, I've got some kind of deep-seated problem. There's a problem. The drugs are definitely a problem. Like, and it took being in a prison bus on the way to the prison yard to realize it. And then a couple hours later, I had it in my mind. All right, well, I've heard it said in the rooms, good sponsor work the steps. So there's probably meetings at this prison, and I'm going to try to find them. And an hour or two later, I was sitting at a table it was me, you, and Ryan, and you had whipped out a big book, and I was sitting there, and it happened.
If you say so.
It had my attention.
How's that any different than today?
Well, no, but it drew my attention. It was like that curiosity, right? It also brought hope to me too. That
hope or faith. A lot of people get that confused.
Well, now that you point that out, I guess a small amount of faith was put into me, which made me hopeful.
So now we're a lot more clear on grace, the spiritual principles of grace and mercy, and their effects. Okay, so I learned this from Scripture because the majority of the books in the New Testament literally begin and end with grace. A lot of the books in there. They'll say, may the grace of God be with you, or may the grace and mercy, or grace and peace, or grace and something. A lot of them, they start with grace, and they literally end in grace. So that's a spiritual principle that I like to call the Alpha and the Omega. It ends the same way that it begins. Paul says to the Romans, it begins in faith and ends in faith, thereby it is through faith. That's another spiritual principle. What I've come to term as the Alpha and the Omega. Okay, so we have an example of that again in here. The end of this story with Bill Dotson, it ends on the note, the very last sentence of it. He never drank again. He too has become a respected and useful member of his community. He has helped other men recover and is a power in the church from which he was long absent, right? Because so it ends in grace. Grace gives us access to divine power. So he went back to the church and became a power in the church. This is important for me to understand, because if I want to remain in the sphere of God's grace and mercy, I have to go out into the world and I have to be an instrument of his grace and mercy. It has to end in that. The other spiritual principle we have in play in here is he talks about he helped other men recover. Is the spiritual principle of multiplication. It's the same principle on which the carpenter dude fed 5,000 people with a handful of fish and a handful of bread. All that is an illustration of the spiritual principle of multiplication. It's how you know that the divine Father is at work, is by that happening. And Bill ends his whole story on that. If you go to the very last page of Bill's story, page 16, most of us feel we need to look no further for utopia. We have it with us right here and now. Each day, my friend's simple talk in our kitchen multiplies itself into a widening circle of peace on earth and goodwill to men. Principle of multiplication. And this is what I try to point out to some people, a lot of them futilely, but this is not about fucking staying sober. I don't care if you've been sober a day, a month, a year, 10 years, or 100 fucking years. That is means nothing to me. They measured their progress by the growth of the fellowship. They kept very close records of that, and they watched the fellowship multiply. From another book, it talks about the kingdom, right? The growth of the kingdom. The spiritual principle of multiplication. Okay, so I'm going to go back and we'll work on Bill Dotson's story some more. We're on page 157. So they put him in a private room and said, we'll be down. Okay, 2 days later, a future fellow of Alcoholics Anonymous stared glassily at the strangers beside his bed. Who are you fellows? And why this private room? I was always in a ward before, said one of the visitors. We're giving you a treatment for alcoholism. Hopelessness was written large on the man's face as he replied, oh, but that's no use. Nothing would fix me. I'm a goner. The last 3 times, I got drunk on the way home from here. I'm afraid to go out the door. I can't understand it. For an hour, the 2 friends told him about their drinking experiences. Over and over, he would say, that's me, I drink like that. Okay, so they talk about sharing our experience, strength, and hope.
Trying to get them
to which I say phooey on that fucking bullshit, okay? I carry a message, and the main part of my message I carry is a message of truth. That's what these guys brought to Bill Dotson, was their experience of their truth, right? For an hour, the 2 friends told him about their drinking experiences. Over and over, he would say, that's me, I drink like that. So it's a message of truth.
Showing them how they can relate.
The man on the bed was told of the acute poisoning from which he suffered, how it deteriorates the body of an alcoholic and warps his mind. There was much talk about the mental state preceding the first drink. Okay, so now that he's accepting their truth, they're saying, that's me, I drink like that. He can relate to their truth.
Trying to show him the hopelessness.
Now they're explaining to him the truth of his condition. Obviously, he's ready for that. So we have grace in play, we have hopelessness in play, we have truth in play. Now we're going to turn the tables and get you to start looking within to find the power in you, okay? Yes, that's me, said the sick man, the very image. You fellows know your stuff all right, but I don't see what good it'll do. You fellows are somebody. I was once, but I'm a nobody now. From what you tell me, I know more than ever. I can't stop. At this, both the visitors burst into a laugh. Said the future fellow anonymous, damn little to laugh about I can see. Okay, so They are an example of what this power can do for a person. Just like Abby sitting at the table turning down the drink was an example of what this power can do. And Bill seen that. He was witnessing what this power was able to do. There's no more power in him right now than there is in me. He's powerless. How in the fuck is he pulling this off? So I'm carrying an example of what this power can do in order to invoke faith in the other man. Right? Because this is another spiritual principle, the principle of faith. I'm trying to get that man to come to faith that this can work for him just like it worked for me by being an example of that. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So the other one we have here is about hopelessness. They start up by saying hopelessness was written large on the man's face. Okay, he seemed hopeless. When he finally said, you fellas are somebody, I was once but nobody. From what you tell me, I know more than ever, I can't stop. So we have absolute desperation, the end of the rope, complete, pure hopelessness. At this, both the visitors burst into a laugh. Why would they laugh?
Because they know that it's not hopeless? Because they worked for them already?
Because he is at the point of utter hopelessness.
Because they know how he feels.
Because they're experiencing hope. Right? The more hopeless, I don't want to carry a message of fucking hope. I'm just prolonging the other person's suffering. I want to invoke hopelessness in the other person. If you get back into chapter 7, around 96, 95, somewhere in there, it talks about the more hopeless he is, the better off he is because he's more apt to follow my suggestions. I want to bring about hopelessness in the other person. And the more hopeless they are, the more hope I get that they're going to be somebody who sticks around and gets this thing. It's a paradox. The more hopeless they are, the more hope I get. When I experience hope, I start smiling. And if I get a big enough dose of it, I will bust out laughing. I've had the fucking experience a number of times. It's a very powerful experience. And it only comes as a paradox to the other person's hopelessness. I've had a dude end up in tears in front of me and I'm laughing because I'm experiencing hope because of his hopelessness.
I get that.
And there's other examples of it earlier on in the book.
I had that when I left rehab and I was waiting for you to pick me up.
What happened?
There was a guy that was sitting in the lobby and I was charging my phone and I think I asked him if he had a cigarette and he was like, yeah, I do. And he was like, I don't have a lighter though. And I was like, well, I have a lighter. And I was like, you can have it. I'll trade it for a cigarette. And we stepped out front. And I was trying to practice it while I was in jail, trying to carry my story, my message to people in there. And it was just, that was kind of my mindset, was like, keep growing in this. And here was someone that was going into detox, looked pretty hopeless and tore up. And so I just started asking him questions, I forget exactly what all I asked him, probably something along the lines of, so what brought you here? You here for detox? What are you using? Da, da, da. And at some point during the conversation, he started crying. And I had this big smile on my face because I was like, and I told him, I said, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to laugh at you. I was like, you're not going to be able to realize it right now, but you are in the perfect state of being to be able to get this, and it's funny that you brought that up because I remember that vividly, like seeing this guy just like miserable, and I was like, good for you, because
Do you remember what that feeling was like for you?
Feeling miserable?
Knowing you experienced that dose of hope for that guy.
Well, it was short-lived because then I got in the car with my sponsor and he berated me. Because because he was very upset that I left rehab early.
We're not talking about after that. We're talking about during that, at that time.
It
It's almost like a very deep sense of joy.
yeah.
It pushes a smile, and eventually a laugh right out of you. Isn't that a wonderful fucking feeling?
It is.
Kind of like what you might have experienced at the beginning of your using that always eluded you.
Yeah. I guess so.
That's one of my payoffs for chasing these new people. Why I don't have to see it through to the end, why I can keep taking them at the beginning and then losing them. Hope. It's fucking powerful. It's like a drug.
Yeah, because I remember when I was in the car with you, you were hitting me with all kinds of stuff. And you know, you were concerned. And I was just had this inner state of just like, I hear you. Like, for once, I hear you. I now hear all the things that you've been saying.
All the other bullshit.
So, damn little to laugh about that I can see. Right? Then the two friends spoke of their spiritual experience and told him about the course of action they carried out. Right? They didn't give him a fucking meeting list. They didn't ask him to go to a meeting. They didn't pull out a book. They didn't start reading a book.
Have I been in a distressed state, gone to a meeting,
And it's helped.
and the meeting might help for a little bit, but
I think-
not once did my distressed state get fixed at all from going to
Yeah,
some meeting.
a meeting is not what changed my
Why
mindset.
did it help a little bit? Like while you were there?
Because
He always looks for people.
I use the meetings are for me a form of meditation. I've disciplined myself to go to the meeting and pay attention to what everyone's sharing. I don't care if it's, what was his name? I don't care if Kevin's in that meeting and I have to hear the story, the share for the 500th time.
He used to say the same thing.
Yes.
He was like Cody.
It's no.
Okay, so from another book it says, wherever two or more are gathered in my name, there I shall be. Okay, so when you go to the rooms, there's a friendliness, a fellowship, and an understanding which is indescribably wonderful. And it's indescribable because it's the fellowship of the Spirit. You're in a healing environment. But if you don't take the steps necessary to find that from within, then it's fleeting and soon lost.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I just don't see, like, if I just did
Right.
the meetings, it wouldn't help.
I say that one more time.
When you're at a meeting, you're in there with multiple people, and the Spirit is there. Wherever two or more are gathered in my name, there I shall be. The Spirit is in that room because people are gathered in His name by His power. There is one who has all power, that one is God, may find him now. You're in the presence of the healing of the Spirit while you're in that room. But if you don't eventually go through the process of learning to find it from within yourself, then when you leave the meeting, then it's fleeting and soon lost, right? You felt good while you were there, but in a matter of hours or days, it's gone. You're back to square zero again.
That's why, like
Because
that
you
dude
have to
said, just like
transition.
they to try to stay sober between meetings.
And how do you do that?
With that, hopefully with that power, hopefully.
By learning that the Spirit dwells within you and to look within instead of... Because eyesight without insight is spiritual blindness. So the two friends spoke of their spiritual experience and told him about the course of action they had carried out. Okay? They're talking about the solution and they're talking about the program. They're not talking about meetings.
Right.
They're not talking about books.
Right.
They're not pulling a chip out, look at how many fucking numbers are on this chip. No. They didn't tell them how long they've been sober.
Yeah, me and Mitch were talking about that the other day. Like,
Well, we have a code here. What's our code?
I'm not seeing
Maybe I'm off. 84.
84, bro.
Yep.
Where is it?
84, the last paragraph, and we have cease fighting anything or anyone. The sentence before that, what does it say?
Love and tolerance of others is our code.
Ah ha 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 ha. Love and tolerance of others is our code.
So that's
So
why-
the more progress I make in this program and apply it to myself, the more tolerant I'll become of other people. This is
Right,
the program
right, like
of how other people should act. It's a program of if I
should
act better, it won't bother me so much what other people are or aren't doing.
Right, I get that.
I try to be helpful, but I cannot be helpful to everyone.
Exactly.
But God will show me how to take a kindly and tolerant view towards each and every one of them.
Right. I mean, maybe my old self might have like talked shit to those people or something, but that didn't even cross
But you're
my mind.
seeing that.
I'm just seeing it. It's
To
like,
me, that's
I
growth in
wasn't-
you,
yeah, I
that
wasn't-
you're seeing this.
Yeah, I wasn't saying like I wasn't gonna say anything new or anything. I just kind of mentioned it to Mitchell, like.
We're at the bottom of page 157. The two friends spoke of their spiritual experience and told him about the course of action they carried out. So in Bill's story, he asks Ebby how he's pulling this off, and Ebby says these men come and rescued him from the court, and they told him about a simple religious idea and a practical program of action. Right? And the simple religious idea is that God dwells within you, and we have a practical program of action that will prove that to you through your own experience. You will feel it.
So you can just look back and see things that you may not have noticed before, where, or in just in everyday life, really, you notice. If I'm looking for it, I see it. That's.
Okay. He interrupted saying, I used to be strong for the church, but that won't fix it. Okay, religion didn't fix it, but they're talking about spirituality, not religion.
Yeah, he's looking at it the wrong way. Like,
okay, I prayed to God on hangover mornings and sworn that I'd never touch another drop, but by 9 o'clock I'd be boiled as an owl. Next day found the prospect more receptive. He had been thinking it over. Maybe you're right, he said. God ought to be able to do anything. Then he added, he sure didn't do much for me when I was trying to fight this booze racket alone. On the third day, the lawyer gave his life to the care and direction of his Creator and said he was perfectly willing to do anything necessary. His wife came, scarcely daring to be hopeful, though she thought she saw something different about her husband already. He had begun to have a spiritual experience. That afternoon, he put on his clothes and walked from the hospital a free man. He entered a political campaign making speeches, frequenting men's gathering places of all sorts, often staying up all night. He lost the race by only a narrow margin, but he had found God, and in finding God, had found himself. That was in June 1935. He never, ever drank again. He, too, has become a respected and useful member of his community. He has helped other men recover and is a power in the church from which he was long absent. I went through all this with him. I don't know if you've gone through that with Adam or not, about the 4 fundamental spiritual principles are
Truth,
truth,
selflessness,
selflessness.
love, faith. I brought it up to him once or twice.
Okay, so we showed how we carry a message of truth, and we walk as an example of the power to bring other people to faith. That's how the truth and faith come into play in this particular story. The only way that's going to come about if the person is selfless enough to be going out and searching for the next man, right? And when we're done, if that man joins the fellowship, we're now joined in the fellowship of the Spirit, which is the love is the glue that binds us together, right? Which kind of falls into the next paragraph. It says, so you see there were 3 alcoholics in that town who now felt they had to give to others what they had found or be sunk. After several failures to find others, a 4th turned up. He came through an acquaintance who had heard the good news. He proved to be a devil-may-care young fellow whose parents could not make out whether he wanted to stop drinking or not. They were deeply religious people, much shocked by their son's refusal to have anything to do with the church. He suffered horribly from his sprees, but it seemed as if nothing could be done for him. He consented, however, to go to the hospital where he occupied the very room recently vacated by the lawyer. He had 3 visitors. After a bit, he said, the way you fellows put the spiritual stuff makes sense. I'm ready to do business. I guess the old folks were right after all. So 1 more was added to the fellowship. All this time, our friend of the hotel lobby incident remained in that town. So they're talking about Bill W. He was there 3 months. He now returned home, leaving behind his first acquaintance, the lawyer and the devil-may-care chap. These men had found something brand new in life. Though they knew they must help other alcoholics if they would remain sober, that motive became secondary. It was transcended by the happiness they found in giving themselves for others. Okay, that's love. That is the love that they're talking about. That is
The fellowship.
It's putting somebody else's well-being above my own. It's work and self-sacrifice for others, as Bill says in his story, okay? That's what love means. They shared their homes, their slender resources, and gladly devoted their spare hours to fellow sufferers. They were willing by day or night to place a new man in the hospital and visit him afterward. They grew in numbers. So there we have the principle of multiplication again. They grew in numbers. They experienced a few distressing failures, but in those cases, they made an effort to bring the man's family into a spiritual way of living, thus relieving much worry and suffering. So we start getting into how the love works in the rooms, right? You know what? I'm gonna continue on. A year and 6 months later, these three had succeeded with 7 more. Right? They didn't say they continued to fucking stay sober. They're making note of the fact that by the end of 1936, there was 10 total. The growth of the fellowship. Seeing much of each other, scarce an evening passed that someone's home did not shelter a little gathering of men and women, happy in their release, and constantly thinking how they might present their discovery to some newcomer. In addition to these casual get-togethers, it became customary to set apart one night a week for a meeting to be attended by anyone or everyone interested in a spiritual way of life. Aside from fellowship and sociability, the prime object was to provide a time and place where new people might bring their problems, okay? The primary purpose is not to stay sober and to help others recover from fucking alcoholism. No. It tells us the prime object for meetings, formal meetings, so the newcomer knows where and when to find us should they come looking. I'm supposed to be out there looking for them, but if they happen to hear about us and want to find us, they know where and when to find us. That's it. I'm going to skip over to... Okay, I'm going to keep reading. Outsiders became interested. One man and his wife placed their large home at the disposal of this strangely assorted crowd. This couple has since become so fascinated that they have dedicated their home to the work. Many a distracted wife has visited this house to find loving and understanding companionship among women who knew her problem, to hear from the lips of their husbands what had happened to them, to be advised how her own wayward mate might be hospitalized and approached when next he stumbled. Many a man yet dazed from his hospital experience has stepped over the threshold of that home into freedom. Many an alcoholic who entered there came away with an answer. He succumbed to that gay crowd inside who laughed at their own misfortunes and understood his. Impressed by those who visited him at the hospital, he capitulated, which means surrendered, right? And he capitulated entirely when later, in an upper room of this house, he heard the story of some man whose experience closely tallied with his own. The expression on the faces of the women, that indefinable something in the eyes of the men, the stimulating and electric atmosphere of the place conspired to let him know that here was haven at last. Okay, and I like this part because this kind of describes the environment that I want to participate in to try to create in a meeting environment, right? It says the very practical approach to his problems, the absence of intolerance of any kind, the informality, the genuine democracy, the uncanny understanding which these people had were irresistible. He and his wife would leave elated by the thought of what they could now do for some stricken acquaintance and his family. They knew they had a host of new friends. It seemed they had known these strangers always. They had seen miracles, and one of them was to come to them. They had visioned the great reality, their loving and all-powerful Creator. Now this house will hardly accommodate its weekly visitors, for the number 60 or 80 as a rule. Alcoholics are being attracted from far and near. From surrounding towns, families drive long distances to be present. A community 30 miles away has 15 fellows of Alcoholics Anonymous. Being a large place, we think that someday its fellowship will number many hundreds. But life among Alcoholics Anonymous is more than attending gatherings and visiting hospitals or detoxes or rehabs or IOP houses. Cleaning up old scrapes, helping to settle family differences, explaining the disinherited son to his irate parents, or the disinherited husband to his irate wife, which happens more often than not, lending money and securing jobs for each other when justified. These are everyday occurrences. No one is too discredited or has sunk too low to be welcomed cordially if he means business. Social distinctions, petty rivalries, and jealousies, these are laughed out of countenance. Being wrecked in the same vessel, being restored and united under one God, with hearts and minds attuned to the welfare of others, the things which matter so much to some people no longer signify much to them. How could they? So, one final suggestion, if you haven't done so already. Abandon yourself to God as you understand God. Admit your faults to Him and to your fellows. Okay, you want to know what to do with your 4-step inventory, your moral inventory. You have a moral inventory and a spiritual inventory. What do you do with your moral inventory? You admit it to God and to your fellows, which is plural, right? So one of the things that you do in a meeting. Don't listen to this shit about, don't pink or 5-step stuff on me. Well, you do it in a general way, but you still fucking do it in front of multiple people. Okay? Admit your faults to Him and to your fellows. Clear away the wreckage of your past. Give freely of what you find and join us. We shall be with you in the fellowship of the Spirit, and you will surely meet some of us as you trudge the road of happy destiny. It doesn't say to happy destiny. It says of happy destiny. It's a process, not an event. And until then, may God bless you and keep you sane, safe, and sober.